How's it going, guys? My name's Graham and welcome to Two Left Thumbs. Was $2.5 million raised to fund the development of Hiveswap either stolen or embezzled? Maybe you've seen the headlines or news articles relating to this. I would like to dig into it as deep as we possibly can, not necessarily seeking the truth, but doing the best that I can to inform the public of the finer points of this story. Loads of people out there are likely aware of the Hiveswap game, developed by Andrew Hussie based on his much more widely known Homestuck universe. But what I'm sure only a subset of either fanbase is aware of is what an unmitigated disaster making Hiveswap a reality truly was. Maybe more of you know this story than I think, but there seems to be a lack of comprehensive videos fully explaining the situation. And prior to doing my own research, I personally fell in the camp of not knowing this behind the scenes nightmare. So I will do my best here to lay out the facts, share pieces of conjecture and speculation that fill in a few gaps, and hopefully bring everyone up to speed on this supposed development catastrophe. Back in 2017, we saw the release of Andrew's large-scale Homestuck-based game project, Hiveswap, the result of a monumental Kickstarter success story that came as a result of a humble creator building a massive fanbase for his webcomic over many years of hard work. Knowing that the game was eventually released means it couldn't be all that bad, right? I mean, we certainly have our fair share of Kickstarter disasters that never see the light of day, but this game was coming 3 years later than planned and had been unexpectedly split into multiple acts. A late in development splitting of a game is usually not a good sign. So what happened? Was it simply the case of poorly managed time, money, resources, or some combination of the three, as we've seen time and time again on Kickstarter projects? Was the creator simply overly ambitious and overstepped their capabilities? If you're to believe the rumors that have circulated for years around Hiveswap, the delays and compromises made on the planned game were actually the result of a huge chunk of that Kickstarter money being stolen away. Get ready, strap yourselves in, this is a hell of a story and it borders on unbelievable at times. If it is true, it is both a sickening tale of deceit and theft, yet a shocking success story in spite of everything being stacked against Andrew Hussie and his team. But to be super clear, these allegations all remain unsubstantiated rumors. I don't advocate grabbing your torch and pitchforks, as none of these shady dealings have been confirmed. I'll leave you to make your own conclusions after receiving all the information. Any accusations made throughout this video are based on people's individual findings and are in no way the real word of law. None of this has been taken to and proven in court. That's partly why I think maybe others haven't made a video on this. When you have individual pieces of information, these shreds of rumors don't really add up to much. So let's try and flesh things out a little further, shall we? I think it's important that we start with the facts. So we'll begin with aspects of this development history that are undeniable and lay the foundations of all speculations that came after. As established, writer and illustrator Andrew Hussie is most well known for his Homestuck series, although he is the creator of the entirety of MS Paint Adventures, a webcomic collection that includes Hussie's series Jailbreak, Problem Sleuth, and Homestuck, with Homestuck by far being the largest of these comics, spanning over 8,000 illustrated pages and 800,000 words. To put that into perspective, the entire Lord of the Rings novel trilogy plus The Hobbit is a little under 3/4 of that. The best comparison I could make is if you were to read the first 6 Harry Potter books and someone illustrated every single page of them. The series also included detailed animations, minigames, and other interactive elements. It was obvious that the series was capable of expanding well beyond its comic origins. Building off of years of success and a massively grown fan base, Andrew launched a Kickstarter for a Homestuck Adventure Game in late 2012. Starting from here is where I'll do my best to try and have a visual timeline for things. The Kickstarter asked for $700,000 to complete this dream project. This should give you some indication of how large that built-in Homestuck fanbase was. That goal was reached in 32 hours, and the final amount raised after the full month was just under $2.5 million. An unknown amount was then donated after the campaign ended through PayPal via Slacker backers, pushing the funding a little over $2.5 million. So just to keep things easy, we'll round to 2.5. At the time, it doubled the second highest comic-related Kickstarter. It was only the 5th game to pull 7 figures, and the 3rd highest video game project on the platform. The Kickstarter launched with a projected completion of June 2014. Obviously, this target was going to have to be re-evaluated with this massive swell of cash being injected into development. Reaching a goal this large comes with a lot of obligations. Your game won't magically become 4 times larger than planned because chunks of it go to Kickstarter, payment processing, physical rewards, and various other commitments. Time would need to be taken to reevaluate the allocation of financial assets, making a plan of action, and mapping out how this remaining funding could be used to expand the project. That alone is going to expand the development time beyond what was originally planned for. Now, over the years, the Homestuck comic had taken a few pauses, usually around a month or 2 long, where Andrew focused on other projects, or took the time to plan out larger Homestuck story arcs. From October 2013 to October 2014, we saw the Gigapause, a 1-year break taken to focus on the development of Hiveswap. It was starting to seem like outsourcing development would be the right plan of action. You gotta find the right people for the job. Someone who has experience delivering a completed, fully fleshed project, and someone who's comfortable working with larger budgets. Creating this new development plan and finding the right devs and moving the project forward took longer than expected. In 2014, the time the game was laughably first projected for, based on that original funding of $700,000, it was announced that the Odd Gentleman had been hired to develop the game. They were a relatively new studio, having completed the successful Misadventures of PB Winterbottom and finishing development on Neil Gaiman's Wayward Manor. Yet only 2 months after this public announcement from both Hussie on the Kickstarter blog and the developers themselves, we had some unexpected news. In August 2014, Activision announced that the Odd Gentleman would be making their King's Quest adventure game revival. It seems strange for such a small studio to take on multiple large projects such as this, especially when we'd only really seen a few teases and pieces of concept art from Hiveswap so far. It didn't appear to be nearing the end of development at all. Questions were rightfully raised as to how this small indie studio would be able to cover the development of both games. By October 2014, only 2 more months after that, Andrew Hussie announced the formation of What Pumpkin Studios, an in-house studio founded by himself that would be completing production of the game, stating that the Odd Gentleman's involvement was winding down. It was also at this time that it was revealed the main game would be released in an episodic fashion, Hiveswap Act 1 and Act 2, and with the addition of a second game, tentatively known as Haunt Switch, which will presumably also be released in 2 acts. The 2 games are set to have parallel storytelling that could be played in either order. This was a dramatic shift in production teams and priorities. The project suddenly fracturing into 2 games, releasing with 2 acts each, did not appear to reflect a smooth production pipeline. A Hiveswap website was launched in February 2015 and set a target release of mid-2015. A month later, an asset reel showing some 3D character models was posted in an update, and the first and rather infamous teaser trailer was shared a month after that. In hindsight of a quality game being released, people are rather forgiving looking back on this teaser, but at the time people were very off-put and growingly concerned with the low frame rate, textural bugs, jumpy animation, and lack of overall content actually shown. While the art and music generally looked and sounded good, the sum of its parts did not look like a $2.5 million game over 2 years into its development. Throughout 2015, there were a couple of behind-the-scenes updates about development restructuring, merchandise contracting, and an office move. But the next real game update came in December 2015, shooting way past the teased release date. Apparently, the 3D graphics came with a multitude of technical issues that were slowing down production and eating up their budget. A complete overhaul of the game was taking place, switching to a 2D art style, despite the appearance that Hiveswap would never see the light of day. After numerous other intended release dates were missed, the game finally hit in September 2017. There's simply less to share during that production window. Yes, the shifts in studios and styles were dramatic, but that seemed to be when things finally settled down, and they were able to grind out a game ready to be released to the public. I won't pretend the development of Act 2 has gone particularly smoothly, but it doesn't seem to be getting dragged down by the behind-the-scenes drama of the original release. The development process simply hasn't been very well reported this time. I assume it's a limited team playing things close to the chest. The team of What Pumpkin changed almost entirely in early 2018, as I'll cover in a minute. Yet that's nowhere near the shitstorm that was Act 1's development. This new team released a much smaller game, Hiveswap Friendship Simulator, while the company restructured and geared back up for their main project. A teaser for Act 2 was released on Halloween 2019, although they appear to have learned their lesson with release dates and simply listed 2020 as the intended release window. Now that we've covered all the factual, surface-level turmoil of Hiveswap's development, it may appear that the team is mismanaged, incompetent, or simply inexperienced, failing to update fans, meet release windows, and requiring multiple restarts and restructures. It's hard to say how many, if any, of those actually apply here. I certainly don't mean to be that critical, but that statement on its own sounds super harsh. Over the years, fans have been closely tracking this development and suggest that the behind-the-scenes issues may have been more malicious, leaving Hussie and others in a helpless position financially and productively. I present these rumors to allow you to form your own conclusions and better understand one possible explanation of what may have been going on. I'm going to restate this. Please do not take specifics of the remainder of this timeline to be fact. It is simply an organized summary of supposed dealings and outcomes that attentive fans have done their best to assemble. I'm sharing the supposed history surrounding Hiveswap's development, and am working to fill in others on what this alleged controversy was. I am not claiming to have any insider knowledge or confirmations of these shared accounts from various events. And with that, I think I've more than thoroughly extrapolated this information beyond fact or opinion to avoid any potential legal damnation. At least, we can hope so. Back in July 2015, we saw a lengthy Tumblr post from ipgd, someone who had worked on Homestuck and speaks with Andrew on occasion. Many in the fandom perceived her as someone who would be a potentially reliable source on Hiveswap's development. It's not someone who's specifically in the know, but it's not a total rando either. In this post supposedly telling all, it was stated that the odd gentleman stole Kickstarter money and spent it on King's Quest. You know, the project they were hired to work on only months after being hired for Hiveswap. In the time since, a lot of ipgd's social media have been wiped clean or privatized, and I totally understand that. Following these statements, they were likely flooded with ravenous fans of both Andrews wanting answers about Hiveswap, and fans of the Odd Gentleman defending that company. But the post was shared enough times that copies are relatively easy to track down still. I'll share a few choice excerpts and paraphrasings of this post that chronicle the supposed behind the scenes. First off, Andrew couldn't share details himself because of a settlement he signed. ipgd's own digging shows that What Pumpkin gave the Odd Gentleman $788,000 in 2012 to develop Hiveswap. The company blew off the agreed upon development schedule and did next to nothing on the game. Over 8 months of development, and the Odd Gentleman produced exactly one playable build. It is a single room involving one character, no animation, and almost no other key features. Virtually nothing works properly. It was submitted in February of 2014, and no improvements or additional versions were submitted beyond this date. ipgd supposedly played the build. She said it featured broken models and was unplayably buggy. At that point, they basically ghosted Andrew. He moved across the country to oversee development, but was not allowed to visit the Odd Gentleman's office. This is when their working contract was terminated. The Odd Gentleman claimed to only have half of their allotted funds remaining. In the 7 months it took to negotiate a settlement, the Odd Gentleman spent another $170,000 on King's Quest, half of what remained of that original half. It was obvious that money didn't go anywhere else because they had openly discontinued work on Hiveswap. This part is supposedly less well documented, but it was speculated that most of the $190,000 spent on Hiveswap before the King's Quest contract came in actually went into Neil Gaiman's Wayward Manor. They claimed lengthy man-hours to account for the money spent, yet had nothing to show for it. Andrew's Homestuck Gigapause seemed to have less to do with the development of Hiveswap and more to do with dealing with the disaster of the Odd Gentleman's involvement and trying to wrestle back control of the game. Andrew's settlement means very little of that $788,000 made it back to him, if any, and through a settlement he would be completely unable to publicly discuss any of this himself. A Twitter user asked Hussie about this Tumblr post. His response was, "Post wasn't official in any capacity. Asked the user to delete it. I have no comment on the matters between What Pumpkin and the Odd Gentleman. Either it was unofficial and inaccurate, or it is true and Andrew is legally bound to not talk about it." This post certainly got fans questioning things, and additional research was made into the situation because Danny of the Game Grumps is a die-hard fan of the original King's Quest series. With the revival's upcoming release around the time of IGPD's post, there was a surge of internet sleuths wanting to share the full story with Dan and Ross to not play the game on either Game Grumps or Steam Train, wanting to not give any publicity to a game and studio that did not deserve it in their eyes. Most of what was dug up at this time is anecdotal, but it did seem to largely corroborate ipgd's story, and here are a few additional details that the community shared at that time. In June 2014, alongside the announcement of the Odd Gentleman's involvement, a backer-only Kickstarter post was hopeful for a late 2014 release, expecting to soon see a surge of development effort now that Wayward Manor was supposedly completed. In September 2014, we had the first bit of Hiveswap news in months. This would have been a month after the Odd Gentleman's contract to produce King's Quest came in, and a month before Hiveswap became an internally developed project. Andrew expressed his desire for the game to have completed development before the gigapause came to an end. What have I been doing all year? Let's chalk it up to, in this order of relevance, a swirling multitude of daunting life challenges, a flurry of accidental weird adventures causing me to thrash wildly across the nation, and the escalating complexities of running a business while tending to peripheral creative projects, not the least of which has been overseeing the development of an expensive video game. What were the problems? What were the adventures? Sorry, nothing to see here. In October 2014, alongside the move to What Pumpkin's development, the original plan had us testing the game by this point. Looks like testing within the first half of next year is more likely. Around this time, the Odd Gentleman removed all blog posts and other information from their website detailing their involvement with the game. This feels painfully similar to the end result of Wayward Manor. The game was originally listed as being developed by the Odd Gentleman and published by Moonshark. Looking at it now, you will see that it is listed as being developed and published by Moonshark. Same as what happened with Hiveswap, that game has similarly been nuked from the Odd Gentleman's own website, despite their involvement being well documented in numerous publications. In a Polygon interview with the Odd Gentleman in April 2015, their lead engineer said they were previously working on a project, but when offered King's Quest, they leapt on that instead.
When Lindsay came to me, she actually gave me a choice. We had another project going on and she's like, you want this or you want King's Quest? King's Quest, no doubt, give it to me, I can't wait to get started.
If this theft of funds is true, then many could accuse Andrew Hussie of being naive, a poor manager, or an unfit game director for being so easily taken advantage of. I think that's probably the wrong perspective. I doubt many people when presented with that amount of money would know how to properly allocate it immediately. I see absolutely no reason for the supposed victim to shoulder the real blame here. It made sense to turn to an experienced developer who expressed interest in working on the project. They had proven their ability to complete games and deliver quality products. Nobody expects to be hustled, especially not in a professional setting like this. Given this story, I would side with Andrew and suggest that he was taken advantage of simply for making reasonable assumptions of not getting point-blank robbed through a very publicly funded and developed project. Besides the hypothetical NDA that went with Andrew's hypothetical settlement, many may wonder why additional legal action wasn't taken to recoup losses and bring some form of justice to these shady dealings. From an outside perspective, I simply believe it would not be worth the legal fees. Let's say Andrew started with that $2.5 million. Approximately 1/10 of that evaporates with Kickstarter fees and payment processing, and that might be being generous. So our actual starting point is $2.25 million. The project sold 7,329 $15 copies and 4,559 $25 copies. These are the ones that are most lucrative and most directly fund the game's development, as they are the only digital-only tiers. The remaining 12,500 copies sold all came with physical rewards that needed to be fulfilled. While these are obviously coming at a markup to alleviate some costs and ensure there are no losses, actual conceptualization, creation, and shipping will still add up. It's impossible to know the exact amount, especially per tier, but from example projects I looked into, people doing post-mortems on their Kickstarter projects, the cost can range from about 5 to 20% of the funding accumulated. Hiveswap was a physical reward-heavy project. I'm wildly ballparking here, but let's estimate close to 15% of the budget went to that. We're now left with $1.9 million. Approximately $800,000 was given to the Odd Gentleman for their development, and it can be assumed that Andrew got next to none of that money back. Yikes, we're already down to $1.1 million? And at this stage, realistically, none of it has gone towards the game? It's safe to assume that Andrew was paying himself and others for concept art, music, writing, design, merchandise production, and other outside work during the first year and a half of production. I'm sure many of them weren't full-time, and indie developers are no strangers to living on a budget. But factor in costs like Andrew attempting to move closer to this imploding project, and whatever other unexpected costs, we are easily below that $1 million mark by the time What Pumpkin is formed, when they started the game's art and engine from scratch. When you're essentially starting over, working with less than 40% of the original budget that was pledged to you, I can imagine the last thing you want to do is flush away any of that chasing a legal battle that you're not guaranteed to win. If legal action were pursued, the Odd Gentleman likely had a bankroll of build hours and documented costs, as well as technically providing a deliverable, no matter how busted it was. We don't know what those development schedules and contract stipulations look like. They may have been incredibly vague, and in the eyes of the law, Hussie could simply come across as a poor planner and an ineffective team manager. And would we really trust a bunch of crusty old judiciaries to comprehend how funds for a video game about a webcomic would or could realistically be spent? Considering Andrew's lack of experience, from their perspective it would make the case of the money being stolen all the weaker. You don't have to be a lawyer to know that everything would have been stacked against the What Pumpkin team. An ambiguous and uncertain case like this would have taken years, delaying the game, wasting what was left of the money, and adding a monumental layer of stress to what was already likely an Everest-like peak at this stage. The burden of proof here is staggering, and the ability to actually prove illegal activity would be nigh impossible. I agree with their decision that the better strategy was to bear down and simply work to get the game into the hands of fans as quickly as possible. No need to drag this out and risk everything. If any of this story is to be believed, it explains the exhausted resources, massive delays, team restructurings, the need to restart the game's graphics and engine into something the internal team was more comfortable with, and the decision to split the projects into 2 episodic games. That lessens the burden of it being one singular do-or-die release, allows the fans to play some of what was paid for more quickly, and provides an opportunity to fund further development, not dissimilar to Double Fine's release strategy with Broken Age. A lot of the pieces of this fact and fiction seem to fit together conveniently well. I won't draw any conclusions or assign any blame myself, but I will say it's a miracle that this game was released at all, and that we should be giving Hussie as much credit as possible for somehow steering this seemingly doomed project towards a proper release. Regardless of what aspects of the story have been properly proven, I hope this video at least filled you in well enough to no longer feel out of the loop when people reference this story in regards to Homestuck, Hiveswap, The Odd Gentleman, or in any other context. If you guys are aware of any other details, please share them in the comments. If you have any speculations or supposed connections of your own, we would love to hear them. Seeing as all of this is conjecture anyway, it's very open to discussion. Thank you to all the patrons of the channel, their support means so much. I'm trying to do more to support that side of the community, but expanding it actually becomes a lot easier the more people that support it, so it's a weird catch-22. That's something I gotta figure out myself. I actually have a Let's Play channel where I recently played through the entirety of Hiveswap Act 1. I had a lot of fun with it. I'll have that in the end cards, you guys can go check that out for yourselves. This channel is filled with video essays, comic book stuff, and all things video game related, really whatever I feel like talking about, so I'll leave the other end card as best for viewer, and that's something that YouTube thinks that you specifically would like. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon.